Okay, peeps, welcome back. So, today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin and why it appears to be doing absolutely nothing. So, let's get it. So, I know it's been a while since we talked about Bitcoin, but we did have a bunch of other stuff that we wanted to get done. That usually happens roughly around the first of the month. Plus, you guys want to know about LTCN and some other stuff. So, this had to wait a little bit longer than expected. Sorry about that. So let's get into Bitcoin. Before we get into the chart, we're going to get into all the other metrics first. So we're taking a look at the 5-year crypto chart. From this perspective, still looking pretty cheap, as you guys can see on the overall line here. Not really much going on. Basically, what this indicates when it's just kind of staggering about, not really ripping hard or dumping hard, is there is a lot of apathy in the market, meaning that there's no FOMO. Retail's not aping in to try to get the on the gravy train, so to speak. So that's still a good sign for buyers that want to buy before the prices start ripping to the moon. So now we're going to take a look at the Bitcoin version here. So Bitcoin recently had a big spike up. That was because of the spot Bitcoin ETF news. We all know that. As you guys can see, it basically went back straight back down to where it was before that, or even lower, actually. Excuse me. So, with that being said, sorry, fellas. So, with that being said, the price of Bitcoin, or I should say the Google Trends for Bitcoin, is not really doing much. It's kind of just stagnating about. That's pretty standard for pre-having, or I should say, market Bitcoin having years before the Bitcoin having actually takes place. As you guys can see here, it did something very similar in 2020, before and even during and after the halving, because the halving was right here, roughly around this peak. And even after the halving, it didn't do much until it did, and then everybody started FOMOing in. So from that perspective, still a really good time to buy. Now, fear and greed index, as you guys can see, we have pulled back a little bit, but not really a lot on the fear and greed index from basically last month. Reason being is because, once again, Bitcoin kind of just blasted off up here, and then it's basically done absolutely nothing since then. So it makes perfect sense that the fear and greed would naturally just kind of slowly taper off a little bit. It's not really a whole lot to read into this. But if we take a look at the was it this one? Yeah. So we take a look at the max chart here. You guys can see that we did kind of pull back from the 72 level. Basically told you guys, if it gets anywhere between 70 to 95, I would say that's a pretty good selling point, not financial advice. And as you guys can see, we're kind of just bobbing around basically between 55 and 70 up here. So could go either way. I think it's a little bit early to say whether Bitcoin's going to go up or down just yet. MVRV still looking very cheap. Once again, once you get into this light pink or darker pink box up here, that is when the risk levels are very high and the whales are more likely to come out and dump on retail traders. Basically, what I'm saying here is if you're in profit, you not financial advice, but if you're up here and in profit, you might want to consider taking some off the table. And I would say anywhere below the 4 level here is still a great time to buy. So we are well below that. We're at 1.18. And keep in mind, Bitcoin generally starts popping off about the end of the halving year. So we're in the halving year, but we're not at the end of it. Okay. So we got probably like another 9-10 months or so before Bitcoin potentially starts skyrocketing to the moon. So now is a really good time to get in. Basically anything crypto. Now we take a look at the Bitcoin rainbow chart. You guys can see we're still in the accumulation phase. They have all the prices marked down here below. You guys can see the black line is the current price, and the absolute maximum bubble territory is between 180 to 250,000. We're well below that. So Bitcoin, compared to where the top of this thing could be, is really cheap. That's still roughly about a 5 or 6x to all-time highs if it does actually go that high. and we're much closer to the basically a fire sale zone than we are maximum bubble territory. So another good signal that prices are still cheap as of currently. So with that being said, we have 75 days until the halving. Just so y'all know, we did pick up some LTCN today. We put about 50% back into our position, and we're basically going to scale in the more that the price comes down, but we'll get into that in a later video. So yes, we are still buying crypto, just so y'all know. We are still buying the Bitcoin miner stocks. We do still plan on buying native cryptocurrencies, and we do still plan on buying more of the Grayscale trusts. So that's not going to change until the Bitcoin bull run gets started. We're just going to keep accumulating because we learned our lesson last time when we got in the month of the halving and just sat on the opportunity for 6 months and did nothing about it. We're not going to make that same mistake this time. So you guys can see we basically have 2.5 months left, and then we will have the halving on April 21st. So that's not far away. I mean, it's February right now, so the window's closing. Just wanted to let y'all know that. So the Nupal chart, we are currently kind of in the middle, not super cheap, not super expensive. Keep in mind when we hit capitulation down here, or we're anywhere in this zone, that is the perfect buying opportunity. That is a golden opportunity. As you guys can see, we have only been in this green box a few times throughout Bitcoin's history. And likewise, we've also only been in the Euphoria Greed box a few times throughout history. So basically what this says right now is that the overall crypto market is still valued at fair value, meaning it's not cheap, but it's not expensive. Although I would personally argue that a lot of the cryptocurrencies in the market, aside from Bitcoin and Ethereum, are still pretty cheap. If you ask me, I would say Ethereum and Bitcoin are probably somewhere in fair value, or maybe slightly under fair value, with still a lot of potential to run up. So now getting into the Bitcoin chart. As you guys can see here, we're on the weekly. We're actually going to break this down over multiple time frames. So you guys can see that we basically, once we hit this red EMA back here, we absolutely moonshot. You guys can see that we bounced off the trend line here. We were under the EMAs, which was obviously very bearish. And then we popped back above it once we kind of rode this trend line and went boop, straight back up, right over the EMAs, retested it. And from there, we just absolutely moonshot up way, way above the EMAs. You know what? This whole green, all this green right here, you know what this reminds me of? Let's go back and look at the first cycle peak of the Bitcoin bull run. As you guys can see here, you got something very similar. So the price just kept ripping to the moon, and the EMAs fanned out, which is a very bullish sign, but we didn't really touch the EMAs all that much. As you guys can see here, we didn't even get a single wick under the 9 EMA at all during the first part of the Bitcoin bull run. And as a result, we kind of chopped around for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. You guys can see that we chopped around for nearly 3 months straight, and then had this humongous 50% drop straight back into support to the trend lines ish, and also to the EMAs, and then we ran up again after that. So what's going on right now, in my opinion, is pretty similar to what happened during the first peak in the previous cycle of the bull run, or the 2020-2021 first peak of Bitcoin's bull run. It's looking very similar. We basically just had this ridiculous pump, and then now we've been sitting at roughly about 10 weeks of doing absolutely nothing. Bitcoin tried to break out. It hit that March 2022 high, which was the swing high before the massive dump into the bear market, and immediately got rejected, shot back into this, you could potentially call it a flag pattern, but I would call it more of just like a zone. And since then, we haven't really done much, but as you guys can see, very similar. The EMAs have fanned out. We did not have a single wick into the EMAs except for this one right here, which got bought up immediately. And I'm all for being bullish, but I got to be realistic here. Just looking at the weekly here on Bitcoin, I would say this is probably some kind of Wyckoff distribution. If you guys don't know what that is, you're going to have to go look it up for yourself. It would take a long time for me to explain it here, but basically what this is a seller's zone, okay? This is a zone where the bears at the right particular time could come in and just say, you know what, screw you guys. We're going to dump on your heads. We're dumping you as far down as we can go. And then Bitcoin potentially comes back down to somewhere around, I would say somewhere between 34 to 38,000 initially, and then maybe as low as 31,000. Depends on how long it takes for this to play out. But in my mind, as a trader, if this thing was going to break out, it would have done so already. I mean, 10 weeks to be stuck in this zone without a breakout is kind of really a long time. And another thing to point out is we told you guys on X, if you were following us, we still got the bearish divergence going on here, still overbought. Okay, that's obviously not a good sign. Every time we've seen that throughout Bitcoin's history, it's had a massive drop, and the MACDs are about to have a death cross, as you can see, although it has not been confirmed yet. But if we go back here and just take a quick look at these indicators, you guys can see, we'll point this out once again. So when the RSI got overbought, we had what do we have back here? We had a bearish divergence, okay? Very similar to what we have now. Price shot up, chopped sideways, and we had a huge dump. And we also had a bearish divergence during that time frame. And then the MACD, closer towards the end of the distribution phase, before it actually started dumping, had a death cross. We're seeing something very, very similar here. Not exact, but very similar. So if we go even further back in Bitcoin's history, you guys can see something very similar here. MACD got overbought, or not MACD, RSI got overbought. And then we kind of chopped sideways, and then the MACD had a death cross, and then we dumped off a cliff from that point. Again, back here during the 2017 peak, this is a very bird's eye view, but we're going to get deeper into this. So 2017, RSI was overbought. Of course, it was overbought the whole time, but the kicker here is that the RSI was overbought, and then the MACD had a death cross, and then we had a massive dump. And we also broke the trend on the monthly, which we'll look at later. Now, something we had a commenter recently saying that LTCN most likely wasn't going to come back down below $9. I would say, based on technicals, that is true. However, Bitcoin is the market mover. Do understand that Bitcoin moves everything in the market. Okay, Bitcoin is the ocean. And if the ocean gets crazy and volatile and starts wiping out ships, it's because Bitcoin did it. Okay, so when Bitcoin goes down, altcoins go down. That includes any non-native crypto positions like Bitcoin miner stocks, Grayscale Trust, whatever else is out there. And if Bitcoin goes up, well, more or less altcoins go up. We would have thought that most likely altcoins would be popping off right now since Bitcoin's doing nothing. But as you can see, they haven't really been popping off, and we've been following the market closely to take a look at that. And the whole entire market pretty much has been doing nothing. So I would say that's not really a good sign. So something to keep in mind, there could potentially be a dump coming, which would line up perfectly with the technicals and the history we just showed you guys with the MACD death cross and the RSI divergence playing out into a distribution phase in previous years within Bitcoin. But something else we wanted to point out too that is also a major confluence. Generally speaking, before the Bitcoin halving takes place, there is some kind of dump in Bitcoin, okay? So you guys can see we've had 10 weeks of consolidation. If we dump into the halving, that would not be the least bit surprising. I'm going to show you why right now. So we'll go a little bit deeper into these charts. So we're going to go back here to the Bitcoin block or Bitcoin halving block. And you guys can look at this for yourself. Just type in Bitcoin halving clock and you'll be able to see all the information you need. So the previous cycle halving was May 11th of 2020. We can take a look at that. So you guys see that this is basically May 11th of 2020 right here. So May 11th, 2020, as you guys can see, we had a drop in Bitcoin. Now, it wasn't a big drop, but it was a drop nonetheless. But it doesn't necessarily have to be right before the halving. So if we go from the start of the year, or well, not the start of the year, we'll basically just say the swing high of the year pre-halving, you guys can see that there was a huge dump, okay? 62%, massive pandemic dump. Now, a lot of people might say, "Oh, well, that's just a black swan event." That doesn't necessarily. That's not necessarily true. But wait, there's more. There is more. I'm about to show you right now. So we're gonna move out even further on this chart. So we'll take a look at the previous Bitcoin halving here, which was July 2016. We actually were not even in. We didn't even know about crypto in July 2016. What a shame. So as you guys can see here, July 2016. Funny how it lines up almost exactly. So here's your July right here. So if we go from the swing high of 2016 pre-halving, as you guys can see, we had another massive 40% drop. So the previous two cycles alone, there was a drop before the Bitcoin halving, okay? And the technicals line up with it, how long it takes, whether it's actually going to happen or not. I would say there's a high probability that it does happen, but how long it could take to play out, well, that's anybody's guess. Really, honestly, don't know. But generally, when we get these MACD crosses, as you guys can see, there is very, very clear evidence that a reversal move is about to take place. So you got this fake out here, and then you got another death cross, and boom, just absolute dumped on. And then we get the MACD golden cross here. Took a little while to play out, but we did eventually end up moving up. And now we're about to get another death cross, so keep that in mind. Now, if we go out to the daily time frame, take a look at the daily time frame real quick. As you guys can see, very similar, kind of just chopping around, up and down, all around. Not really doing much here. Very similar with the MACD. We did have a golden cross here, but once again, it's not really doing much. And in my opinion, if this thing was going to move up, it would have moved up already. I don't think this thing is going to break out to the upside, if I'm being completely honest. So with that being said, we'll move down to the 4-hourly chart. 4-hourly chart, we are still above the EMAs. Why am I bringing up these lower time frames? Because typically when a dump does start to play out, it starts out on the lower time frames and then starts showing in time on the higher ones. So we had a breakout of this trend line, so that could potentially be bullish. Maybe another move back up to 44,000. We'll just have to wait and see. But I'm not really totally convinced this thing is going to go up because, again, the RSI is just kind of chopping sideways, not really making a definitive move one way or another. Now, we are going to go out to the monthly time frame, which is the biggest time frame that we have to look at. As you guys can see, and this really paints a very clear picture of what's going on here. As you guys can see, this thing is just ridiculous. It has not even touched the EMAs, not once, in 4 months at this point. Okay, EMAs on the monthly are all still way down here around this trend line and this box, and we have not had a single retest of that. Now, keep in mind, the trend line on the monthly, once this breaks, that's typically our kind of like signal, like, okay, the bull market is over. This thing is about to dump. As you guys can see here, it played out perfectly. Also very similar on the 2019 run up. Once it broke, basically downside from there, and also 2017, very similar. As you guys can see, it's pretty close to about as perfect of an indicator as you're going to get. So yeah, we haven't touched the EMAs at all on the monthly, so there's a real possibility that this thing could pull back into the monthly EMAs and the trend line based on this. Obviously, I'd have to move this box out a little bit further, so maybe it kind of lands maybe around here somewhere in the middle of the box, like maybe 35,000. If this happens, that would be the time to be loading the boat on the Grayscale Trust, because they're going to dump when Bitcoin dumps and altcoins are going to dump and all that, if it does happen. So there is one more thing we're going to look at here, and that is the Bitcoin Pi Cycle Top Indicator. So, have we seen a Pi Cycle Top Indicator pop up yet? No, we have not. Generally speaking, this thing pops up after the Bitcoin halving takes place, but also at the cycle peak. We have not had the Bitcoin halving yet, so we do not have an indicator popping up saying that this is the Pi Cycle Top. Again, back in 2016, you guys know the Bitcoin halving was all the way back here somewhere in 2016. The peak was in 2017. So the cycle top indicator popped up once again after the halving, but not before the peak of the cycle. So this would indicate that we are far from the top. Whether this indicator remains 100% true or not, only time will tell. But as far as I'm concerned, we are still in effect to go into bull mode this year, assuming the Fed doesn't try to ruin everything for us. So anyways, hope you all enjoyed this content. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see y'all later. Peace.